Good day, and welcome to the latest episode of Kingston School of Arts Hot Bananas. This is our attempt at a history improv show of different histories and contexts. Today, we have three special guests, and we'll introduce them shortly. And we'll be talking about the subject of virtues and vice. A recap of the format for the next half hour, each of them will talk about a social object, so relating to the theme of virtues and or vices. Fancy word for that is signifiers. And we'll get three of that, 10 minutes each. And then once they've shown us what their object is, we'll just give them time to have a conversation, see what magic and serendipities happen. And maybe I might prod the three of them with the question, so what? Because ideas are great, but really, well, this is an art college and we want to make stuff and we want to create something from these fantastic ideas. Our guests are, this is obviously part two of the show. But previously, we've had Faris and Rosie, our very own Chavi, who is a lecturer in our department, and another strategist named James Kaig. And we are now joined by, ta-da, welcome Laurent, Claire, and Rana. I'm calling you the vendors because you're selling us virtues and vices. But of course, we also have our traditional job titles too. And okay, so before we kick that off, I believe I have appointed Laurent to be the first to present, but I just want to share something that the students made just to give us a bit of flavor as to what Hot Bananas is. So here we go. And 1, 2, 3. Okay, so Laurent, hit it. Over to
All
you.
right, so I'm just gonna share my screen because, as you can imagine, when I heard about this hot banana stuff, I did not understand anything. Like I didn't know what it was about, what this vice stuff, what this virtue thing. So I actually had to chat with the team in Amsterdam and in Paris, asking what's vice, what virtue, and the first thing that the guys told me, like, okay, in terms of volume metry, in terms of volume of attention, what do these two notions represent? So we started by having a look at lyrics in recent pop cultures. And it's super interesting because when it comes to the two words, vice and virtue, obviously there's far more interest apparently for the vice than for the virtue, which was not necessarily a big surprise, but still interesting to see that there is still this crave for the vice, and we wanted to dig more into this. So what we did is that we've used a social listening tool, and we just did some top lines exercise to see in terms of frequency of mentions, how people and how many times do people for the last 12 months have shared a conversation or mentioned the word vice versus the word virtue. And obviously we got rid of the magazine, we got rid of the presidency elements so as we could have a clean stat. And again, super interesting because yes, more interest for the vice part of the world, but when it comes to assessing the sentiment, we've realized that actually people were in the vast majority of times speaking very badly or were really having negative terms related to virtue. So very interesting because on one side the vice it's obviously overrepresented, but in the meantime the virtue itself is poorly talked about. So what's happened? I mean, is virtue become the new vice? Is it something that actually is now an insult? And it's true that we had a look around lexicon words, stuff, conversation in which people use this notion of virtue. And it's true that in social networks, which is more my practice and my field of work in advertising. Very quickly, when people disagree, there is this whole debate about virtue signaling. It's very true, I think, in the English speaking world, and it's very, very, very true also in the French speaking world. It's also getting there in the two sort of Chinese languages. So, very interesting is that suddenly it has become a definite insult to say when someone pretends to have this kind of virtuous attitude or try to pretend who is not or who she's not. So we had to look very quickly in terms of volume of interest through search engines. And again, a little surprise is that for the last 14, 16 years, the level of interest, which is translated in Google World by the volume of search queries regarding Vice, is still very high compared to Virtue, but is collapsing. So we asked ourselves, uh, are people really tired of the Vice? Are people really fed up with a vicious approach? So we were wondering, how come this Vice approach is slightly, collapsing, at least in terms of search. So we had some cool conversation with the guys, and one of them intrigued me, and it's basically my social object. It's actually one of the guys told us that, or told me, that the main problem or the fundamental problem of that, it's actually the day that the Web 2.0 was born, and that's the problem is the HTML code. So for them, and that is for me, the social object representing the biggest problem or the pain point regarding virtue and vice, it's when suddenly we've split the form of the content and the content itself. Why? Because suddenly, thanks to this code, what's interesting is that you can replicate a message which used to be attached to the form in previous world, to a versatility of ways of expressing this message in so many different places, so as that sometimes maybe we reach a point in which the content, which was initially a virtuous element, becomes maybe a commodity, becomes something which is no longer something we can refer to, and becomes more a sort of signal of excitement. That's something on which we can build a process. And discussing that with some friends, it's true that what we all discussed at the very end, that what is really at stake, it's probably the time and the immediacy, and that when it comes to virtue and vice, maybe one of the important factor, it's how can we actually reintroduce a bit of time so as people can process again the relationship to virtue or vice, and actually get a better sense, maybe mindfully speaking, to define what's also right or wrong. So we had a look at existing or emerging channels that are, booming, especially among the youngsters. And we were extremely fascinated by the success in the last couple of weeks of Diapo. So I don't know if you've played with that, but basically it's an app that youngsters use more and more and more and more these days, in which you take a photo, but actually to get this photo, you need to wait up until the next morning to access it, as it was the case in the past with analog film. And actually, people are really, really craving for that because it's a way to also impose to take the time to reconsider maybe the value of an ID or the value of a message before shooting it, and in a way, kind of killing the vice or the virtue of the conversation. And as a conclusion, based on this initial, thinking. Well, I read again the fable of the bees. I don't know if you've read it. It's a very old one. I think it's more than 300 years old, by a guy called Mandeville. And it was a sort of poem, very, very controversial when it was released, because basically what he said, he took the analogy of a hive, and he said, how come, whereas all these bees are kind of egomaniac, egotistic, are extremely aggressive with one another. Suddenly, because they have this kind of very, very personal crave and personal interest, well, at the end, the hive works pretty well. And what I think is that actually maybe the vice really strongly need the virtue. Why? Because in a way, all these private vices, if we follow Monville approach, actually help in getting or reaching a public benefit. And that's something that, yeah, so that was just it for me for now. So it's not a social object per se, but more like a food for thought.
No, thank you. I think I have a grasp of which, so to like, talking about HTML, it's pretty great, really. Separation, so the coding, I think is yeah. So I'm sure Rana and Claire have something to say about that. So we'll keep the kind of radar twitching as like we'll tag on next to Claire as to what her social object is. But thank you, Laurent, for that. We'll get back to it after Claire and Rana. So Claire, your turn, please.
So in the style of Hot Bananas, this is completely improvised. I've done a couple of years worth of improv courses, but not done any since the pandemic hit. But yeah, this hasn't been rehearsed. I have no slides, and I'm going to try something a bit different. When Rena asked me to talk about vice, I did the usual Googling, what is a vice? Yep, drinking is a vice, smoking is a vice. But the vice I want to talk about is buying art. So this probably started with this piece here, which is a Peter Blake print bought at the Art Car Boot Fair in 2007, probably for maybe 25, 50 pounds. And Art Car Boot Fair is quite a subversive, or used to be quite a subversive event where artists would go and literally open up their car boot. It was normally sponsored by Vauxhall. They would sell a piece of art that was very inexpensive and in limited supply, and people would go and queue and look for it. It's now become much more commercialized. It's very difficult to get a ticket. You'll be jostling with people trying to pick up about 6 objects or 6 pieces which people have made. But I also thought it might be quite interesting to sort of look at why this is a vice for me. So at the beginning of lockdown, obviously there's, you were kind of casting around for what can I actually do? And I actually categorized the entire art collection I have, which is already quite geeky and not really like me. I have at points tried to stop myself from buying art, and I've given myself rules. So I've said, okay, you can only buy objects, you can't buy prints anymore. And I've failed hugely. How bad is this vice? I was going to try and do a little tour of the house so you can see how bad it is. So I don't know if you want to switch to the other camera. Yeah, we've got it. God, this is horrific.
I love this.
So okay, we're on right. So I just need to turn it around. There we go, flip the camera. So first piece is a Jimmy Cauty little jam jar. So it's a figure from an exhibition I went to years ago in Shoreditch. And it's called Aftermath Dislocation Principle. He built a whole world with these figures, and I bought one of them from the man himself. Just moving around, you've got quite a bit in here, but the main one is the Cold War Steve. Again, sort of an inexpensive piece, which I've picked up. This is a Dave Buonagidi. You'll see some more of those around the house. This is an anti-Borrell. There's a load of more postcards and stuff up there. Another one. It's
incredible.
This is, I can't remember her name, but this wonderful illustrator. I fell in love with this about 3 years ago. And this is probably the first piece that I bought with my niece in mind. It's called Grandparents Hiding. This is a Poppy's paper cuts one. I just love the sentiment. We've got a Joe Webb there. There's a few of those around the house as well. This is Jerry Buxton. So it's actually a screen printed phone. I kind of fell in love with these as well. We've got more Dave Wanagidi there and there. We've got a Toby Ansell, which I'm just, not Toby Ansell, it's Toby, oh my goodness, what's his name? Toby, the Da Vinci Tobe is him on Instagram. And that is the guy who does the children's books, Oliver, can't remember his name, can't remember his surname. But we're going to go into the bathroom, which is a bit mad. There's loads in here. So we've got Tracy Emin signed poster. We've got another Joe Webb. The theme in here is kind of hands. So that's Marina Abramovich from when she did her stuff at the Serpentine. That's one I made. And then that's a Bench Allen. Can't remember the name of the guy up there. There's some more bits there. That's a Natasha Caruana. Gonna go downstairs.
This is incredible. There's more.
How much time have I got left?
Museum.
So another Dave Wanagidi. He did a little collab with Lush. So it's a flag. This is probably the most staid of all of them. This is a Heaton Cooper, which do a lot of landscapes of the Lake District. We're on to the really cool stuff now. This is the Connor brothers, who do a lot of prints for Calm and Mind. We've got Jealous Gallery. We've got a random paper plate that I picked up from a gig. Top one is David Barry, Russell Marshall. These are artworks from my niece. This is again, Jimmy Cowty. We've got Amias brothers. We've got this guy who does Hot Fuzz prints. This is actually a Kingston School of Art graduate that I didn't even know. My friend bought me this piece, Louise Bolter. Her stuff is beautiful. And this is a Nikki Hodge, which randomly goes really well with that wallpaper. What else is there? I think that's it. I will flip the camera. Wow, sorry, got to look at my ugly face going up the stairs. But yeah, I mean, it's got pretty bad. I don't know if anyone can help me with this. It's obviously an expensive habit, but yeah, that's kind of it. I'm going to switch to the other camera now.
That is incredible. I think we have a first. We have a what do you call it? Like a tour, like an art history tour. Pretty incredible, really. That was the first in this series. So fantastic. Also, Claire, I'm not sure if you were aware that as you were doing the tour, we were coming up with vices like hell, sex, love, right? Like so a lot of these words were coming out. Oh, how exciting. Okay, I love it. Like two very different vibes. Thank you, Claire. And now we'll pass it on to Rana.
Oh, thank you. I'm kind of like making it a little bit boring now because I've got some slides that I did prepare.
Slides are good.
Okay, fine. But Claire, I am like so loving the artwork. I think I could probably send my husband round. He's starting to get a bit of a thing for buying art, and he'd probably know some of the names that you were referring to. Okay, so where are we? What can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. What can you say? Hot bananas.
Yeah. With you. Yeah. Amazing.
Oh, are you seeing my which are you seeing the navigator?
Yes.
Oh, that's a bit weird. Hold on, that's a bit annoying. 1 second, sorry. I know how to do this. I use Zoom on a regular basis. Okay, let's try again. So, desktop 2. Usually if I do this.
Yay. Okay.
Right. Can you see this?
Yes.
If I go into full screen, can you still see it? Can you see it full screen now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well, yes. firstly, I just love the name of this kind of show, piece, whatever we're calling it, mainly because actually half of it is kind of a name that's associated with me. So yeah, Rana Brightman, but also otherwise known as Rana Banana.
No way.
A nickname that I've had since I was 5 years old, and it has really stuck with me because I'm very, very far away from 5, but I've also embraced it. So it's on my handles. I've even in the past had it on business cards, but that is who I am. So I just had to like make that claim to like hot bananas, Rana bananas. Anyway, coming back to virtues and vices. So similarly to Laurent, I think I was just a bit like, okay, where do you start with this, right? Because it's just such a big topic. I just think of, you know, theology, philosophy, you know, Aristotle, all that kind of stuff. And I know that last time around, a lot of the guys, the 3 guys that presented sort of touched on a lot of those themes. And similarly to Laurent, I actually reached out to the team. I threw something in the Slack channel and said, guys, what comes to mind when you think of virtues and vices? And some of the things, I just wanted to share some of the things before I landed on what my thing was. And it was funny because I had one hunch and it was pretty much the thing I was going to go with until last night, this morning. I was like, nah, I'm going to do something else. And that's kind of, yeah, I don't know why that was, but I think it was just, it kind of sums up a lot of what everyone's already said, but also previous speakers have talked about it. But the team talked about the iPhone. I mean, I thought that was kind of interesting. The notion of technology being this kind of massive enabler, but equally how we have become slaves to our phones. You know, it's the last thing we look at before we go to bed. It's the first thing we look at when we wake up, unless you've got a watch, or unless you're actually really good and are able to kind of create that space and distance from a product, which on the one hand has like really opened our eyes to the world, but on the other, I think we're having such a different relationship with the world around us. This was interesting, and I did actually have to pick this one because I'm just trying to make some subtle hints here. The passport, it's not the British passport we knew, it's the one that we would have from now on due to Brexit. But I thought this was kind of interesting. I think a lot of it's to do with, again, what part of this is about opening up borders, allowing us to kind of see the world, but is there an element of control here as well? Is there an element, is there something sinister? But also if we think about, you know, those that operate in legal terms, those that kind of operate underground. I mean, again, this is another tool that's often used in terms of being able to kind of gain passage, but also to really manipulate and kind of, you know, sort of control people to a certain extent. Books. I thought books was really interesting, you know, thinking about knowledge, but also I think the comment that came from one of the team was speaking to Faust and that whole kind of legend that, you know, what you are willing to give up to have never-ending knowledge, or rather not never-ending knowledge, but all unlimited knowledge, but for a period of time. And whilst books, again, can really sort of take us to places, there's obviously evidence of how they can sort of sometimes, you know, color our thoughts and lead us to certain places that we may not want to kind of end up in. A mirror, you know, it's, you know, a tool for self-reflection, but also it speaks to vanity as well. I love this picture of, you know, a little pawn that kind of looks at itself and sees something much bigger and greater and more powerful. Interestingly, you know, I think this was in relation to pharma, you know, the big pharma industry, or just kind of like medicine even, you know, there's a kind of, there's a virtue in that. Obviously this idea of like speaking to humanity, making sure we can take care of one another and kind of well-being and health, but then also the kind of exploitation that comes with that as well. If we think about big pharma on the kind of sort of negative side of things. This is the one I was actually initially going to be talking about, which was money. And obviously money is, you know, it's an interesting one. It's definitely a kind of social construct. You know, we have this kind of concept of it's real. It kind of isn't. I found this fascinating thread on Twitter the other day, which was talking about, in relation to government debt, you know, it touched on things like the magic money tree and everything else. I mean, I'll have to send it to Rena and she can send it to you guys. It takes some reading. But this idea of us thinking that, like, you know, money is actually there, it really isn't. You know, governments can print as much as they want. Government debt in itself isn't really a thing, like as an individual, what our household debts would be. And there's just lots that you can go with money. You know, I think about games like Monopoly, you know, kind of, you'd think of that at a kind of, you know, initial level as seeing something, you know, kind of, oh, it's playful, it's a family game, it's all about capitalism, right? And we've actually moved on in our household from the board game to a brilliant card game called Monopoly Deal. It's really cheap, you can get it on Amazon, but it's for kids and adults, and it is vicious. It's incredibly manipulative. The kind of negotiation, the twists and turns with this game is unreal, but it all kind of centers around money and property and everything else. Food. I mean, I think food is really interesting if we think about where we are in life right now, in terms of, you know, thinking about sustainability, thinking about kind of well-being and health. There's a real push for kind of pro-plant, you know, veganism, really anti-meat that's kind of happening there. But that's all in response to kind of mass industrial farming and kind of what we're doing to animals, really. And I have to say, I'm not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian, probably more of a flexitarian if I want to identify myself in that way. And maybe that's me kind of having that bit of a virtue and a vice. But I think food is also a really interesting place because, you know, we need food, we need sustenance, but then there is something to be said for that amazing, tasty looking burger, whether it's plant-based or not, but we kind of love to indulge. We want to kind of really fulfill something that feels a little bit naughty, a little bit sweet, you know. So I think that's a really interesting territory when it comes to virtues and vices. And yeah, I had to kind of throw in COVID here. But I think it's in relation to kind of the pandemic as a whole. I mean, there's so many examples of where you see science, you know, what's happening with the vaccination program, how all of, you know, those in this field are desperately trying to kind of, whether it's about finding a cure, finding responses to how we can deal with it, all of that's kind of, to me, feels like, yes, that is virtue at its best, right? But then you sort of see other signs of it. And it's interesting to hear Laurent talk about virtue signaling, because it's certainly a term I would associate when it comes with the pandemic and everyone sort of shouting at each other for not wearing masks and not doing this. And, you know, I'm better than you because I'm standing out there clapping for the NHS. You know, it starts to kind of demonstrate again, something like that has got two sides to it. However, what I did actually decide on is this. This has to be one of the most favorite shows of mine ever. I think as box sets go, it is the kind of, you know, even box set as a term, God, it kind of shows you how old I am. It was a box set when I first was introduced to it. We were literally sharing DVDs in the office, but it is the TV drama of all time. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's kind of been quoted to be Shakespearean-like. You know, I've watched the whole thing and it's kind of old school in that it's 5 seasons with 10 or more, maybe even more than that, 1-hour episodes. You know, we're not kind of doing like much, we're not doing short form content here like we have in the, you know, into today's time, but it is absolutely brilliant, this show. And I don't know whether or not, you know, we were talking about it just before we kind of went live. I don't know whether the students have come across this, but it's crazy to think that this came out nearly like 20 years ago. I think it was aired in 2002 to 2008. I started watching this in 2009. So it actually wasn't a massive show at the time. It was way ahead of its time. It didn't get the same response as The Sopranos did. I think that, you know, that really landed it for HBO, which was the TV station that kind of produced and aired this. But it sort of had a much kind of, you know, a cult following that kind of came with time. And I've just got a kind of 2-minute trailer that I want to play. If I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God, this is gonna be so weird watching this, like so long after watching it.
There are 2 kinds of kids walking in this building. Stoop kids, corner kids. No, stoop kids. They're the ones that stay on the front steps when the parents tell them. The others go down to the corners. You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers. Get down! But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where it's going to take you. You think I have time to answer giving me money or where he gets his money from.
The game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
It's Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you.
Barksdale has 5 out of 7 towers in the terrace.
I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my coins. These people do not touch the drugs. They don't go near the drugs. The wire is what gives us Barksdale. Day by day, piece by piece.
The thing is, you gotta be patient. Learn the job, love the job.
Let the game begin.
How is it you always got the whole world pissed off at you?
Jimmy is an addict, sir. What's he addicted to? Himself. It's also what makes him good police.
He does not get to win, we get to win.
We don't have the courage and the conviction to fight this war the way it should be fought, the way it needs to be fought. Well, then we're staring at defeat, and that defeat will not be forgiven.
Can't even call the shit a war. Why not? Wars end. I've been out there since I was 13. I've been straight up, but what come back? This game is rigged, man. You like the little bitches on the chessboard. Pawns.
You go a long way in this country killing black folk. Young males especially.
You're always in the market for a good soldier. This here ain't you.
Many of these kids are profoundly damaged. What they've seen, how they've lived.
You older than your daddy was when we went out on the court.
What he done got him locked up.
It's the message, D. You can't show no weakness.
A man must have a code.
You come at the camp, you best not miss.
So obviously I don't work for HBO, but I honestly, I think what I learned from this show is that there are no good guys or bad guys. You know, everyone has the capacity for both. There's no black and white. There's many shades of grey in between, and there's this circularity in life that's there in our everyday action. So this idea, you know, whether it's you know, the cop McNulty, who he has his own demons, you know, you heard the quote, he's addicted to himself, he's got an insatiable appetite for women, he just can't help it. And every time, you know, there's moments where you see brilliance in him, and like there's the virtue, and the vices are really strong. And also he's on the police's side. So where do they sit? They in themselves, whether it's the police force, the education system, the government, journalism, all of that stuff, all of these kind of big societal themes are covered and demonstrate there are both virtues and vices within that. Or whether it's the drug dealer, Stringer Bell, you know, and you know how he is looking to really redefine the game of what they do. It's not actually like drug dealing. There's, you know, if he kind of got the chance, he would have like rebranded it to something completely different. And then the one character I actually really wanted to kind of lean in on the most was my favorite, Omar Little, you know, the Wire's Robin Hood. He steals from the dealers to give loosely to the community. And there's another clip, but it's way too long because I know we want to kind of mash it up and have a discussion. But this other clip talked about Omar's rules of the game. So, you know, the fact that, you know, there's a Sunday truce, no one does anything on a Sunday. I think he was taking his grandma to church and someone came rushing out with a gun. The fact that snitching is complicated, you know, there's just certain things that you don't do, but whatever you do, payback is part of it. So kind of really recognizing that if you are going to go there, you have to be willing to accept the payback. Your people are your people. You know, whatever that is in terms of the community, the people that you're around, respect the game and really keep the code in terms of whatever you stand by and live by, you kind of follow through. So I won't play that clip, but I think kind of just coming to the last point, which was virtues and vices, I think really, you know, it speaks to kind of some of the other comments. It's all there. They're not mutually exclusive. I think it's really interesting to hear that people tend to always think of vices more than virtues. And I'd agree. I think in real terms, that is the case. Whereas you could Google the hell out of it. And actually what you find is there's a lot more written up, publicized, I would say, about like in kind of books and papers about virtues. So I think Laurent's piece, where you're actually looking at social sentiment and what's happening in more popular culture to see it kind of leans on the vices, is really, really interesting. But yeah, it's all in the game. They're kind of there. Oh, you're on mute, Rena.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think I need to have like Zoom bingo with that phrase. Thank you, Rana. And excellent kind of third hot banana there. So now over to the three of you to let loose in terms of what you want to say about each other's thoughts, right? So it's a very, I love it. It's just like it's always a pleasure to just like receive the fruits of your labor in terms of this theme. So yeah, over to you.
I was going to ask Rana, have you gone on to watch The Juice?
I haven't, no. The Juice? No.
Oh my God. So the writer of The Wire, David Simon, did a follow-up. Well, not a follow-up. It's a very similar series. It's The Juice, DEUCE, and it basically documents the porn industry in New York.
Oh,
and it is incredible. Another Vice, obviously, bit taboo, but if you can get over the fact that James Franco stars in it as twins, you're kind of okay. But yeah,
I'll check that out. Definitely. No, I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, I haven't watched The Wire for quite a while, and I actually watched it in a really random way as well. Like, I didn't watch it sequentially. Someone gave me season 3, I went to season 4, then started watching season 1. But there's just so much in that I think really speaks to this topic. That, yeah, and I just zoomed in on Omar because I think that's kind of the brilliant example of, you know, he's got the virtuous kind of elements of his personality and what he does or what he represents, but equally, you know, you could look at it without the context and you're like, well, that's wrong and that's wrong. So
right, so just a recap of our selections, pretty interesting. So Laurent, I decided, like, I think I love that you chose HTML. As in, you know, I think HTML is like the code that marries the social listening and like the separation of text from form, and that HTML is represented by two V's that, you know, the other kind of way around is quite interesting. And the idea of yes, buying, like consumption, but of course, like how in an art college we would all say like, yeah, that's a virtue, buy more art, make more art. Like that's not advice at all.
Well, I had a question for Claire, because when you were talking, Claire, you put it as a vice. Yeah. And I was like, why is it a vice? This is great. Like, I'm loving the bathroom with that. Like, I love the things that you had around your house. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit. Why did you think it was a vice? Was it just purely because you think it's too indulged, like excessive?
I think it's the one thing. It was the first thing I came up with. And then I kind of thought, oh no, it isn't. And I think I probably bought more art in lockdown than I have the last couple of years. And that's due to that, the campaign on Instagram, I can't remember what it's called, Artist Pledge. And then I also like the idea of supporting up and coming artists as well. So working at art school, it's kind of quite apt. So I guess it could be either, but it gets to the stage where how much room have I got? How much do I start selling stuff? You know, that's why it's kind of a vice, because you can't consume everything. And then I guess not everybody can collect art. You do have to have money to do it, but we all know money is a construct. So, and plus the whole NFT thing as well at the moment, you know, that whole big cloud of whatever it is.
Speaking of NFT, so this week, Damien Hirst, about 3 days ago, maybe, released his, because it's springtime, his cherry blossom paintings called Virtues, and it was up for sale in cryptocurrencies. And Laurent, like again, like we did talk about Mandeville's Fable of the Beast, so I was really chuffed that you thought that. So for students listening, it's a seminal text. Must explore why, you know, text, like with the whole idea of HTML, right, with text that lives on the internet on the wire is
Yeah.
just responsible. Yeah. So
It's super interesting, Damien. You bring up Damien Hirst as well. Like when you were talking about, what your team had come up with, I thought medicine. He plays with the idea of his pieces with the big medicine cabinets, which I'd kind of never really understood until just before lockdown. There was an exhibition at Newport Street Gallery, and he was showing the first medicine cabinet, which was actually, I think, his nan, who had liver disease, and it was all of her medicine. And I'd never seen that original cabinet. So there was actually some meaning to it. It wasn't just him playing with the idea of medicine, but yeah.
Laurent, I'm going to ask, because of why did you call, well, apart from what else has represented it and have become with your creative campaigns and just clients?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the vice and virtue, what's interesting is that I've never really received a brief, especially in the recent months, where someone asked me to do something virtuous. Like it's all show me badass people, show me vice, show me rough stuff. We want rough, we want the raw. And it's interesting because in a way, I think that there's been such an overload of what used to be perceived as a vice stuff, that maybe there is a sort of a fatigue regarding to this imagery. I mean, porn is no longer something that shocks. We're just maybe bored in a way. When you look at all the people on Instagram showing their beautiful ass or beautiful bodies, you're like, okay, one more hot girl or not hot girl. Oh, she's a bit hot, but not really. I mean, it's become extremely less engaging, to use a marketing buzzword, than it used to be. And in the meantime, it's interesting to see that some imageries that used to be, let's say, from the virtuous part, and maybe, let's talk about modest fashion, for instance. It used to be extremely niche among maybe Orthodox Jewish people or Southern Islamic, trends. It has become something which goes beyond religions, because modest fashion, it's really impacting some Christians, so suddenly there is a new life to it in terms of imagery, even if in terms then of explanation of what it is, it's not necessarily that virtuous. What we also see is that there is a new hype among specific youngsters to be actually hyper conservative. And I mean, in Europe, the faces of extreme right, there are still old guys, but look at Spain, for instance. I mean, the girl is 18 years old. Look at Austria or Germany, the guys are extremely, extremely young. So that's why I think the vice and the virtue, it's interesting because it used to be, I think, pretty easy to say what's vice, what's virtue. It used to be very simple too, to say, oh, okay, religion is bad, let's kill it, and now everything is probably a bit more blurred, which is fascinating, because on one hand it means that, creatively speaking, that's not because you put a naked girl or naked boy that you are suddenly a badass. That's just super low level. So on one side there's a need for more subtleties, and in the meantime there is a need for reinvention for probably the two embodiments of it, in which we keep learning. And it's something probably we haven't talked a lot, which is normal, because but I think depending on the region of the world in which we are, it has actually far different meanings, and I think it's also maybe a mistake that we've done in advertising for a while. It was to impose a sort of one unique way of representation, whereas depending on the subculture, depending on the community, and I love your poster, community is kindness. It's true for us, maybe, but it's also very wrong, because for some people, aggressivity is community. For some people, community is, an attack. community is about maybe something extremely less progressive. I mean, look at the capital. So that's very interesting because these two words per se, they don't mean much, but each tribe can actually give a definition, and it's become hyper political, which is the interesting part, I think.
Yeah. The students are learning that. I think today one of the students mentioned. So really, I think context really is the only thing that matters, doesn't it? And I was like, I think my job's done. Are you done with the course now? But so learning to be specific, which context, where, with who, what, why, and drilling with those details.
But I think also it's about not being so rigid, right? Because even if you get the context and you're really specific, I mean, that's just that is just that one definition of it. The next person comes along and they'll see it with different eyes. And I think the blurriness, the kind of adaptability, we have to be able to we're constantly having to move and, reframe, redefine all of these things, right? So I think it's just always about listening and trying to understand that other person's perspective. So, and it's the same with virtues and vices. I think it is relative, it is contextual. They're not absolute, they're not mutually exclusive, and they will keep evolving and they will take shape in different forms and places. So, it's the classic, what I see as a vice, maybe someone else sees differently, or vice versa, right? So
yeah. Okay, so I think I was just going to ask the three of you as imaginations for the future. So in the blender, we have HTML, the code, the codification of what people are searching for, what we're programming people to see through the web, the buying of what we see as art and whatever our desired object is, the wire as storytelling of these, the different lines in the sand that we draw. So I'll bring it up, and this is what came up. So when I put it in the blender, Rena's blender, or at least the KSA blender, ooh, blurred lines, because you mentioned so
we need to play the
song. So maybe we'll play the song and see what
I'll find it while you're talking.
Right, so this is a joke, of course, but I think you'll probably have opinions of the song and what it really means. But I like that it's like this because one of the cultural historians, Clifford Geertz, about thick description, the thick description of meaning, context, and that there are layers. And so it was just funny. Of course, it doesn't have to be blurred lines. But what would you like to see, Rana, Laurent, and Claire? What could there be more of? Any challenges that you want to lay down and provoke the students?
I have such a specific memory of this song. It's so mad. When it came out, I went to Ibiza and Pharrell performed, and this song came on, and the whole audience just turned into like a flesh pit, talking advice. It was quite an experience.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I do have to turn up the music. Actually, it's interesting you talk about Ibiza. I think that's probably, in the pandemic, the lack of being around other people and just partying and sweating and jumping and doing whatever. God, that's a really, really good example of virtue and vice in that moment, right?
Well, I guess, yeah, we want more of that. We want a return to that scene that has been denied us at the moment.
Surely it's going to happen, right? June 21st.
So, Laurent, give us a Parisian context. I was explaining to the students, we have an international set from different shoots of the world. But with the communications game of with coding, what would you like? Yeah, so just imagining of what would you like to see that in the creative scene?
I mean, what you were just saying before the song, it's we are kind of programming people to react a certain way to specific signs, and it's true with social networks, with TikTok, with Instagram. That's what we are trying to endeavor, even if it's not just manipulation. It's probably reacting to a latent demand or to pre-existing, behaviors. But I read the stuff, the MoMA this morning, because at the end it's all about this coding part. It's all about the kind of social templates or society templates we are evolving in. And what's interesting is for people who dare to slightly change the template, what does it actually mean for us as a group of people? Is it a violence to nature, for instance? Or actually, does it mean that we evolve to pass for more mutual empathy, for instance? And I think there's probably something around that with this vice and virtue, is that at the end, what matters is not the status quo, the now. It's more, as a group of people, do we want to create a new template also? Do we want to create a new template for a wider audience and maybe a general public that we can call a nation, maybe? Or do we want to stick to our subculture or to our mini tribe and be very happy with that too? So it's probably a matter of also seeing to which extent to which goal we are trying to inspire the others and in a way be responsible to take care of. Yeah, I don't know if I was clear, but I tried.
Yeah. I'm in.
We were tried then.
Right. Oh, good. Gorgeous. Okay, we are at the end of that hour. Plenty of material for further contemplation, and obviously a call to action there, changing the templates, new templates, and what that could look like. Yeah, so any final thoughts, Rana, Claire, of like, yeah, what do you want? Useful creativity.
For me, I think it's about, I'm going to go for it, like it is about the extremes. I just think, again, just coming back to where we've been for the last year, when we look at the world before us, what's coming up next, I don't think there's a real difficulty people have had about kind of what are the boundaries, where do I place myself? And I think we're talking about blurred lines. I think just get yourself through that. There are days when you may feel a bit confused, and that's absolutely fine. Don't try and mask it. I think you kind of got to navigate through that fog. But I would say find the moments where what does it mean to you to be virtuous, and really lean into that, really sort of embrace that. And dare I will say, go with the vices too. You need to kind of have those extremes to make sense of what generally sits in the middle, right? Because I think if we're always in the middle, and it's just a bit dull, right? We need to have those kind of elements pulling. And that's why everything we talked about, those two things, one can't exist without the other. Like without vice, there is no virtue, and without virtue, there is no vice, right? So it's kind of, and I think that's the thing, like whether it's thinking about we're going to have to, as we emerge, from the pandemic, we're going to have different ways of connecting with one another. And whether that is the templates, whether that is re-embracing the world we had before, which I will say, like once Printworks opens, I'm there partying. But equally, maybe my world is a lot smaller. Maybe I won't be traveling as much as I once did. I just think I would just say, like, let's not dull ourselves. Let's try and look for the extremes in what we're doing.
Yeah, while Laurent was talking, I just wrote down, be different. I think there's so much pressure, particularly on students, that kind of age group. I don't remember that kind of pressure when I was that young, many years ago. There's so much pressure through social media, and particularly on what you look like, what you're wearing. And that might have disappeared during the pandemic, but I think it's having that sort of conviction to wear crazy trousers or a different hat if you want to, or even, you know, making a statement somewhere, or just trying something very different. I was just reading like the global goals again this morning and thinking about that and thinking, you know, all this negativity, are there some good things going to come from this? You know, how are we going to change? And I think it is only younger people that will make the change, but you've got to work really hard to kind of push out the pale male stale kind of patriarchy. You know, you see all the stuff that's going on with the royal family at the moment, and it's horrific, and it makes you realize how much the establishment sort of have taken over, and it makes me want to put on a Guy Fawkes mask.
Because Laurent.
Well, I mean, I've got the Mr. Robot mask, which isn't quite the same, but yeah, I think be different is my message to the youth.
All right, well, probably to all of us as well. Okay, so that's a wrap. Next week we'll be talking about some somber themes, but for now, that concludes part 2 of Virtues and Vices for Hot Bananas. Thank you, Laurent, Rana, Bananas, and Claire. And till next week, and for now, go and create. So goodbye from us at KSA.
Bye.
Okay, let me just stop recording.